Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just jump right into it. Today we're going to decode exactly how the most consequential safety provision in the entire history of artificial intelligence was systematically dismantled. What we're really looking at here is a massive corporate saga, one that honestly defines the very future of AI governance, where these high-minded idealistic safety goals collided head-on with, well, hundreds of billions of dollars.
To really wrap our heads around how we got here, we have to look back at a hidden mechanism. Imagine a ticking time bomb, but somebody forgot to install a timer on it. This thing was sitting right there in plain sight, tucked away inside the 2019 Microsoft and OpenAI agreement. For years, the single most important sentence in the AI world wasn't a groundbreaking line of code, and it wasn't a model output. It was literally a contract provision. And as this quote highlights so perfectly, it simply vanished the second it became too expensive to keep around.
So what exactly was this mystical provision? Let's break down the AGI clause of 2019. It basically stated that once artificial general intelligence was achieved, Microsoft's access to OpenAI's tech would immediately, hard stop, come to an end. But wait, it gets crazier. OpenAI's board held the unilateral authority to declare that AGI had arrived. They could just call it. Now, this clause was written with deeply idealistic intent, right? The goal was to protect humanity by walling off this godlike technology so it couldn't just be captured by one massive corporation. But as we're going to see, it had a fatal structural flaw.
Because here's the kicker. There was a glaring hole right in the middle of that contract. There was absolutely no agreed-upon objective test for AGI. Zip. Zero. The working definition they used was incredibly vague. It just described systems that surpass humans in most economically valuable work, paired with this somewhat arbitrary threshold of potential profits exceeding $100 billion. I mean, the absurdity here is wild. The trigger for this massive corporate severing was completely undefined. It created this enormous asymmetrical exposure for Microsoft, since their entire AI strategy relied on a term that OpenAI could theoretically redefine on a Tuesday morning if they felt like it.
All right, let's move to Section 1, the mutual hostage standoff.
Fast forward to 2025, and this totally dormant clause suddenly wakes up, and it becomes the absolute biggest obstacle to OpenAI's survival and growth. We are looking at a classic deadlock. On one side, you have OpenAI's weapon, that unilateral power to declare AGI and just cut Microsoft off entirely. On the other side, Microsoft's weapon, their absolute power to consent to or completely block any corporate restructuring. It was a high-stakes standoff. Neither side could pull their respective trigger without blowing up their own commercial future. If OpenAI declared AGI, they'd invite massive regulatory scrutiny and destroy their main revenue pipeline. But if Microsoft blocked the restructuring, they'd starve the very company powering their own flagship AI products. Which brings us to the boiling point in 2025. Step 1. OpenAI is burning through cash. Their compute bills are astronomical. They require capital on a scale they just literally cannot raise under their old, weird nonprofit structure. Step 2. Because of that, they desperately need to restructure into a public benefit corporation to attract that massive new capital. Step 3. Microsoft realizes, oh, this is our moment. They leverage their consent power over that restructuring to force a final resolution on that terrifying AGI clause. It's incredibly ironic, really. The mission-protected provision had become the exact commercial lever Microsoft needed to extract major concessions.
By September 2025, you could practically cut the tension with a knife. Both sides started flashing these massive diversification signals. Out of nowhere, Microsoft integrates Anthropic's Claude into its Copilot software. Meanwhile, OpenAI goes out and signs a staggering $300 billion cloud deal with Oracle. As things boiled over, both companies were very publicly, very visibly reducing their dependence on each other. It's classic negotiation 101, right? By improving your backup plans, you perfectly position yourself to get the best possible settlement.
So that leads us into Section 2, Diffusing the Trigger, Part 1. In October 2025, they finally began cutting the wires on this corporate time bomb by executing a $500 billion recapitalization. When the dust settled on the new OpenAI Group PPC, Microsoft walked away with a clean 27% stake valued around a cool $135 billion. The nonprofit OpenAI Foundation retained 26%, keeping nominal control, while employees and other investors held the remaining 47%. So OpenAI successfully transitioned into the public benefit corporation they desperately needed to be. But what did Microsoft actually get in return for playing ball?
Well, they got this. The unilateral declaration was completely replaced by an independent expert panel verification. OpenAI lost the power to declare AGI on its own. Done. Finished.
Instead, a jointly established independent panel took over the process. In one swift stroke, they fundamentally transformed this volatile, deal-ending cliff into a safe, incredibly predictable administrative procedure.
If we look at the timeline of events here, the speed of this rapid-fire diffusal is honestly dizzying. Over the summer of 2025, negotiations hit that boiling point. By October 28th, the First Amendment neutralizes the unilateral trigger. Then, literally just 6 months later, on April 27, 2026, a Second Amendment decouples the AGI clause from the payments entirely. And the very next day, April 28th, OpenAI models launch on Amazon's AWS Bedrock. Over the course of just a few months, we witness this doomsday clause get completely, systematically stripped of its teeth.
Which brings us to Section 3, Severing the Money, Part 2.
$97 billion. Let that sink in. In April 2026, that Second Amendment severed the very last link between the AGI verification procedure and the actual financial stakes of the deal. By ending Microsoft's cloud exclusivity and decoupling their revenue share from any future AGI milestones, OpenAI secured projected savings of a staggering $97 billion through the year 2030. To put that into perspective, that is the literal financial measure of exactly how much dismantling this clause was worth to OpenAI.
So practically speaking, what does AGI verification even mean today? Well, yes, technically an independent panel still exists to verify AGI. But crucially, verification does not end the partnership anymore. Verification does not escalate or alter the payments in any way. And Microsoft's broad access to the technology, that is explicitly guaranteed to survive all the way through 2032, regardless of whether AGI is achieved or not. What this beautifully illustrates is that while the institutional shell of the safety mission survived on paper, its actual enforcement mechanisms were completely gutted.
All right, let's dive into Section 4. Who actually won?
Let's tally up the final settlement ledger. It is shockingly balanced. Microsoft got durable access to the tech until 2032 and a massive 27% stake, but they conceded their cloud exclusivity and accepted a capped revenue upside. OpenAI, on the other hand, got the PBC structure they desperately needed to survive, plus those $97 billion in savings. But they completely gave up their unilateral AGI lever and the entire mission protective force of the original clause. Objectively speaking, both sides won exactly what they desperately needed commercially. The true casualty here was the idealistic safety teeth of the original clause.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, when capital conquers governance. When we compare the 2019 intent to the 2026 reality, the transition is just stark. A unilateral declaration became a joint panel verification. A consequence that would have unwound the entire deal became a license securely intact through 2032. And a potential financial escalation was entirely decoupled and capped. The clause literally went from a doomsday weapon to a completely inert, harmless footnote in a contract.
And that right there brings us to the absolute core structural lesson of this explainer. It's this: a governance ideal encoded as a contract term inherits the negotiability of a contract term. The crucial takeaway here is that when idealistic mission constraints collide with hundreds of billions of dollars in capital requirements, the capital ensures the contract gets renegotiated, not enforced. Contracts by their very nature are designed to be rewritten when continuing a relationship is simply more valuable than ending it.
Looking at the aftermath, the hardest question in the field, like what actually is AGI, was simply made commercially moot. The form of the mission survived, sure, there's still panels and safety language floating around, but the force of it did not. AGI remains entirely operationally undefined between these two giants, because ultimately, the massive capital requirements needed to build the future simply outweighed the rigid safety cliffs that were designed to protect it. The problem wasn't resolved at all. It was just strategically routed around.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. Did AI governance actually mature here, or was it just defanged? As we barrel towards artificial general intelligence, does this new, stable structure represent mature corporate governance keeping the industry moving safely? Or has the only real safety mechanism, the one truly designed to stop corporate capture, just been quietly neutralized for profit? I'll let you chew on that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.